Discovered my ex-wife's boyfriend is absing our children, and now I'm battling against time to protect them before court. I live in Michigan, USA, and what happened this past Friday has to be the most horrific day of my life. 6 months ago, my wife and I split up. There was no bad blood, no violence or neglect, just the kind of breakup no one really expects. About a month after our split, she started dating someone new, and in the last 3 or 4 weeks, this man unofficially moved into her place. I never liked the guy, but I never had any reason to think he was dangerous or violent. Our custody arrangement was simple: I get the kids for a week, then she gets them the next week, back and forth. I never thought of suing for full custody because, up until now, my ex was always a good mother. We split for our reasons, but none of them had anything to do with anger, violence, or neglect. In fact, she was the kind of person who wouldn't even kill a spider in the kitchen. She would trap it in a glass 4 hours just to release it outside. If a teacher ever yelled at one of our kids, she'd be at the school needing the principal the same day. On Friday night, like clockwork, she dropped off our sons ages 7 and 10, barely making eye contact with me. Things had been civil at first, but after the divorce papers were signed and everything was settled, she barely spoke to me. The boys usually come in and we settle into our Friday night routine, either watching the game, playing video games, or getting a jump start on homework before heading to bed. But this night was different. My younger son seemed broken, just completely despondent, and my older son was hyper and fidgety, almost manic. That was so unlike either of them. Usually the little one is the fidgety one, since he is ADHD, but now he was still and affectless. Something felt horribly off. I asked if everything was okay, and they both muttered yes, but my instincts were screaming. They went upstairs to shower and change, and when I came in to say goodnight, I saw my younger son's back and chest were covered in bruises. At first, I wasn't even giving my full attention, just half watching while checking my email, but out of the corner of my eye, I caught the bruises. I asked him to take his shirt off, and he panicked. This was absolutely not like him. Just earlier this year, I was still helping him in the bath, and both boys would happily run around in nothing but their boxers if you let them. When he finally took off his shirt, I nearly lost it. He was covered in bruises across his torso and had lacerations and welts across his legs. I had to step out of the room to pull myself together so he wouldn't see me break down. When I asked what happened, he just kept saying he fell. It was obvious he was coached. He hasn't lied to me like that since he was 4. I didn't want to press, so I let it go for the moment. Later that night, my older son told me the truth, privately, away from his brother. The beating wasn't an accident, it wasn't a fall. My younger son had done poorly on a test, and my ex's boyfriend whipped him with a belt. When he cried, the boyfriend beat him worse, telling him that men don't cry. I shudder every time I work up the nerve to repeat those words. Everything I've ever taught my boys, everything their mother used to believe in, turned upside down in that moment. But the worst part, the truly traumatic part for both of them, wasn't even the violence of that man. It was that my son's own mother, sat in the room and did nothing. She just let it happen. Without getting into more details because I can barely keep it together thinking about it, I learned this wasn't a one-time thing. This was the first time it was bad enough to leave marks I could see. My sons told me the boyfriend had been hitting both of them for a while, the younger one more often and more severely, and that if they ever spoke up, they'd never see their mom again because she'd lose custody. And my ex, unbelievably, backed him up on that threat. I haven't said anything to my ex about what I know, because I want to go straight to court and fight for full custody before she has any idea. I took pictures of every injury. Rage isn't even a strong enough word for what I feel at her boyfriend for hurting my kids, at her for letting it happen, and at myself for not seeing this coming, for not looking harder at the man who moved into my sons' lives. I called a lawyer the very next morning and explained everything. But the legal advice wasn't what I hoped to hear. Since the boyfriend technically doesn't live there, he kept his own apartment and never officially changed his address. We might not have enough to take custody away from my ex. The kids say he brought over boxes of his stuff a few weeks ago and has slept there every night since, but the technicality makes things complicated. My lawyer also warned me that, once my ex catches wind of what I'm doing, she might just get a restraining order against the boyfriend and claim they've broken up. She could easily say they aren't together anymore, but still see him secretly if she gets to keep custody. Knowing there's even a chance that I won't win custody is destroying me. Every instinct in me is telling me to grab my kids, drive off, change our names and never look back. But our court date isn't until Wednesday, and I'm being told that I may have no choice but to send the boys back to her house at the end of the week. Since they arrived, my boys have barely slept. My youngest is terrified to sleep alone and keeps crawling into bed with his brother, who's so racked with guilt over not stopping the abuse or speaking up sooner that he just gets into bed with me and cries all night. Both of them are starting counseling in a couple of days. I did not see any of this coming. I can't escape the thought that maybe my ex is being abused, too. That maybe this man has broken her or gotten her under some twisted spell. Maybe she needs help. But I can't bring myself to care about her problems, not after what happened to my children. All I want is to keep my boys safe, and I'm praying there's anything I can do to make sure they never have to go back to that nightmare. Update 1. In the meantime, my ex-wife appeared out of nowhere, desperate to take the kids back. I spotted her standing at our front door, pounding and shouting just as I pulled back up from a meeting with my lawyer. Fortunately, I hadn't yet turned into the driveway, and the kids were completely tuned into their iPads with headphones on. I kept driving right past the house. The kids looked up, confused, and I quickly improvised, "Surprise! Ice cream." They didn't even ask why we'd gone all the way to a parlor 3 towns over instead of our usual spot. Maybe they just understood, in their own way, not to ask. Therapy is starting soon, thank God for that. CPS is deeply involved now. There have been 5 separate reports filed, mine, my lawyers, the doctor, the police who were called to the and their school counselor, thanks to the advice of my new, much more aggressive lawyer. The weight of those reports has almost definitely forced the judge to grant the hearing. I'm too nervous to sleep. Tonight, I drove the boys around for 6 hours just so they could get some rest. The car always puts them right out. Now, my oldest is up reading in my bed, while the youngest is curled up next to me in his bed. He's asleep, but every time I try to sneak away to check on his brother, he stirs and wakes up. I'm just holding it together, doing the best I can. Update 2. The hearing got pushed back by a couple of hours, but I couldn't risk leaving. There was always a chance they might call us in sooner, so there we sat, waiting. My nerves were a mess, every minute stretching on forever, but my lawyer radiated an unwavering confidence that kept me afloat. She kept assuring me this would be open and shut. The caseworker hadn't visited our home yet. That was scheduled for this afternoon, but she'd already been by my ex's place. She spoke with the boyfriend, and from what I gathered, her takeaway from that visit was clear: she was recommending the boys stay with me. Hearing that, I felt a tiny glimmer of hope start to crack through the anxiety. The boys had already gone through interviews and exams with CPS, and by all accounts, those had gone as well as I could have hoped for given the circumstances. The things that did go wrong in those interviews, the red flags, would actually work in my favor and help me bring the boys home to safety. That was the only thing I could cling to while waiting for the next step. Next on my agenda after this hearing was to get an order of no contact for the boyfriend. Ideally, I'd go for a restraining order if the circumstances allow it, but that was something I'd have to check in with my lawyer about. Thankfully, she's on the same page and agrees we need something formal to keep him away from us. Meanwhile, a good buddy of mine was at the house today, installing a couple of security cameras. Seriously, one of the best ideas anyone recommended. It gave me some peace of mind, at least, knowing we'd have that extra layer of protection. Update 3. The judge looked straight at my ex's lawyer and said, "Counselor, are you out of your mind?" My own lawyer tells me that's a great sign for us going forward. Honestly, I have no idea where they found the lawyer. He showed up wearing sneakers of all things. Now, I just have to wait until next Wednesday for what comes next. For now, I'm just relieved that we're not up against that same suffocating deadline anymore. The boys get to go back to school on Monday, and they're both doing well. Tonight, my older son fell asleep without any issues for the first time since they came back to me. That alone gives me hope, a little light at the end of all this. Update 4. Sorry for the long delay. It's been an absolutely wild few days, and I barely had a chance to check my emails, let alone think about anything else. The support I've received recently has genuinely helped me survive this insane roller coaster. At first, when I went to court, I did not win full custody. My ex-wife and her lawyer, a truly bizarre character, completely blindsided me by fabricating evidence. They went so far as to claim I'd been fired from a previous job due to violence, even forging a letter from a supposed boss who didn't exist. Can you imagine? I work in it. I honestly couldn't figure out what scenario they could have dreamed up that would end in physical violence. I was completely flustered and terrified by that initial ruling. But thankfully, my lawyer is a total shark. She hadn't seen these fake papers, and she refused to let anyone leave the courtroom until she fully understood the judge's reasoning behind the ruling. As soon as it came to light that there was some sort of evidence she hadn't been able to review, she really dug in. She took that courtroom apart, piece by piece. At the end of the day, the lies were exposed and I was granted full custody. My ex was allowed only limited supervised visits, strictly on the condition that her boyfriend is nowhere near my kids. There's still the option for her to try and get more visits in the future, but only if she can prove that her boyfriend is no longer living under the same roof or anywhere in the picture. On the one hand, I can say the only good thing to come out of her lawyer's antics is that he's actually helping her seek some professional counseling, which honestly seems much needed for whatever personal trauma she's dealing with. My lawyer is also not letting this go. She's following up to ensure anyone responsible for misconduct, including the judge, will be held to account. Right now, I have the kids with me. That's all that matters to me. For now, they are still finishing the school year in her town where we lived together when we were married, but as soon as summer rolls around, I'm moving them to my district. The next step is up to her. For the first time in what feels like ages, I can finally say, my boys are home. That's all that matters. Update 5. Saturday was supposed to be the first supervised visit. I packed the boys' backpacks with snacks they liked and a couple of those little puzzle books so they wouldn't have to just sit in awkward silence if they didn't want to talk. We drove to the center and I signed them in. The room they use has this big fish tank built into the wall and low chairs that squeak when you shift your weight. Everything is soft-edged and quiet. The boys went in with the coordinator, and I stayed in the waiting area with a cup of coffee I couldn't make myself drink. She was late. When she finally walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. She had her hair tucked into a hood like it was freezing, but it wasn't. One side of her jaw was swollen under the makeup. She looked at me and then at the floor, and then she was through the door with the coordinator before I had time to decide if I should say anything. I could see them through the glass. The boys didn't run up to her. They sat. She sat. The coordinator put out crayons. 10 minutes in, the receptionist's phone lit up and she stood, too calm, and flipped a switch by her desk. There was this quiet click, and then one of the coordinators came out and asked me in a voice so level it took a second for it to register, "Sir, could you come with me?" I thought one of the boys had a panic attack or wanted me. Instead they took me down a short hallway and into a staff room and told me, very simply, there was going to be a temporary lockdown. They were moving my kids to the back playroom. I could feel my heart trying to climb out of my throat. Through the narrow window in the stairwell, I saw a gray pickup idling at the end of the lot, nose pointed at the entrance, driver leaned back like he was taking a nap. I didn't even get a full look at his face, but I knew. I knew the way you know the sound of your own front door. 2 police cars slid in from opposite ends like they'd rehearsed it, lights off until they were right there. When the lights came on, the reflection washed the whole fish tank in blue and red, and I saw our youngest see it through the glass and flinch. They pulled him out of the truck. He didn't fight. He looked smaller than he did in my head. One of the officers took a little black notebook out of his pocket. Another bagged a disposable camera and an envelope. The coordinator had put herself between my ex and the window. My ex's hands were shaking so hard I could see it from the hall. When the cuffs went on, my older son stood up so fast his chair toppled. He didn't cry. He didn't move. He just watched. It all lasted maybe 15 minutes. It felt like an hour and a half. When they let me take the boys out, my ex was in a separate room with a woman from the center and someone I didn't recognize who introduced herself as an advocate. My ex didn't look at me on the way out. She was staring at her hands like they belonged to someone else. We made it to the car before the boys said anything. My older one asked if he'd go to jail for real or just the kind where they make you wait a bit. I told him I didn't know, and then the phone rang. A detective. He said they picked him up for violating the no contact order and stalking, and that there were other things in play he couldn't discuss on an open line. He asked if I had time to come down and identify some items. He said one of them was an external drive. I dropped the boys at a neighbor's, someone we trust and who knows what's going on, then went to the station. I signed papers. They showed me the notebook. IMS. School bells. My license plate number. He had written my younger son's name wrong, the way a stranger would. In the envelope were photos of our house, one taken just before dawn from across the street, and a printed copy of our visitation schedule he shouldn't have had. On the drive were screenshots of text messages where he coached exactly what the boys were supposed to say about the bruises. And then there were videos. Ring doorbell clips from my ex's place that hadn't been saved in the cloud. She'd exported them to the drive and given it to the advocate the night before. That part they told me later. For that hour, I just stared at a paused frame of my younger son flinching as a hand came into the edge of the shot. I couldn't make myself hate play. I didn't have to. It was enough. When I got home, there was a patrol car circling our block. The officer parked and came to the door to tell me a temporary protection order had been granted and would be converted to a longer one on Monday. The judge he'd just been in front of didn't mince words. I nodded a lot. I didn't start breathing normally again until the boys were in front of me. We had spaghetti for dinner because it was the only thing I could make on autopilot. Halfway through, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. It was my ex, but calling through the advocate's line. She didn't ask to talk to the boys. She just said, very quietly, "I'm done." She told me she'd been in counseling already this week, that she was at a safe house, that she had told the detective everything. There was a long pause, and then she said, "I'm sorry," and I didn't say anything back because I didn't have anything in me that would sound like the right thing. An hour later, my lawyer sent me a screenshot, "Bond denied for now." There's an extraditable warrant out of Lucas County under a different last name. The forged letter? The bar has opened an investigation. The judge from last week set a show cause hearing for her attorney on the fabrication, and my lawyer is practically vibrating through my phone with how ready she is. Sunday morning, our neighbor knocked and handed me a manila envelope that had been tucked behind our recycling bin. Inside was a birthday card. It was signed Grandma. There was cash and a note in my mother-in-law's tiny, careful handwriting that said, "I believe you. I am so sorry. I will tell whatever needs telling." She'd included her church pastor's card and a folded printout of a text conversation where my ex had told her in December that she had fallen into the door. There were pictures. I sat at the table and for a few minutes I couldn't hear anything in the house except the aquarium pump in the corner. Then my oldest put his hand on my shoulder, and I realized I was shaking the way my ex's hands had been shaking at the center. The day at school drop-off, the principal met us in the parking lot and walked the boys and himself. He'd already put a hold on their files. Nobody not on the list gets within 10 feet. The security cameras at the house ping less now because the department has our address flagged for drive-bys, and for the first time in 2 weeks, last night I fell asleep before midnight. I woke up at 4 anyway and stood in the doorway and watched them breathe. My older one had kicked the blanket off like always. The little one had twisted himself sideways and was snoring like a tiny, exhausted chainsaw. I tucked the blanket back around his shoulders and he didn't wake up. That feels like a miracle. We're back in court Wednesday morning for the PPO hearing and to tighten the supervised visitation terms with some things my lawyer wants in black and white. The boy's therapist is going to submit a letter. The detective says the prosecutor is taking this extremely seriously, his words, and that I should expect to get subpoenaed, which I knew was coming. It's a lot. It's too much. But they're here. They're safe. And when the fish tank flashed blue and red, and no one touched them, I think something in them finally started to uncoil. I could see it. I can still see it now. Update 6. Wednesday did not go the way I imagined, and I mean that in the strangest mix of good and unreal. The PPO hearing was set for 9:30 a.m. We got there early because my lawyer likes to claim chairs. The hallway smelled like old paper and coffee. The same clerk from last week kept tapping at a keyboard that stuck on the R. My ex came in with the advocate in a different jacket than Saturday, hair down this time, and even from 20 feet away I could see she had that look people get when they hadn't slept on a bed with a headboard in a while. She didn't look at me. She kept both hands flat on a file folder like that was the only way to keep them still. When the judge took the bench, it was quick and clean compared to the messes we've had. The detective was there. He had a manila folder that was thicker than last time and he spoke so even you'd think he was reading a weather report. He laid out the jail calls recorded and how, within 6 hours of being booked, there were 3 attempts from him to route messages through other inmates to try and get my ex to fix whatever she'd handed over. The calls went to voicemail. That was enough to tack on witness tampering. They also found an old protective order out of Lucas County tied to a different last name, and a fingerprint that matched the alias. The prosecutor had filed to hold him on that as well. The judge barely needed the convincing. She granted the PPO for me and both boys, 1 year, no contact of any kind, and she said the words "no third-party contact" 3 separate times like she wanted the walls to memorize them. She read the school addresses into the record and barred surveillance, photography down to loitering within 2 blocks. The bailiff had me sign, and then he slid the copies into a plastic sleeve and said, "Keep this on your dashboard if you need it," in a voice that made me want to cry and sleep at the same time. Then came the part I didn't expect. My ex asked to speak. I watched my lawyer's jaw tighten, but she let it happen. The judge swore her in. My ex didn't say much. She said she was at a safe house. She said she was in counseling. She said what we all knew without saying outright last week, that she had been hurt too and that she had been afraid, and that fear had made her a person she doesn't recognize. She didn't ask for anything beyond the ability to send letters to the boys through their therapist until she finishes a domestic violence program the advocate had already put on the calendar. She cried once, very small, like when you cough to clear your throat. The judge looked at me and said, "You will determine, with the therapist, How and when any correspondence is shared, and I nodded. It felt like nodding underwater. We didn't even get a chance to leave the building before they called us down the hall for the show cause hearing on her attorney. He walked in without a briefcase. Just a stack of papers and a tie that didn't match his shirt. He tried to blame a paralegal who didn't exist. He tried a joke that fell so hard you could feel the air go out of the room. The judge didn't yell. He lowered his voice. He made him read, out loud, the letter about me that he'd filed, and then he asked one question: who typed this? Every answer was a wrong one. By the end of it, the judge sanctioned him, ordered fees, referred the matter to the prosecutor's office for potential criminal charges, and announced on the record that he was transmitting everything to the Attorney Grievance Commission with a request for interim suspension. The bailiff didn't put cuffs on him to move his lie about that part, but he did walk him out like someone who had just been told to leave a wedding. On the way past us, he didn't look left or right. The detective caught me in the hallway after. He kept it short. Aggravated stalking, witness tampering, child abuse in the third degree, for now with more possible as they finish the forensic work, the Ohio warrant in play. Bond still denied. We're moving fast, he said, and it didn't sound like bragging. It sounded like something heavy finally deciding to roll downhill the right direction. He also told me they'd executed a warrant on the pickup. In a pocket behind the driver's seat they found a printed map with 3 routes to our house highlighted in different colors and a sticky note with our new camera brand written on it. He was studying you, he said. I didn't tell him about how I still wake up at 4 a.m. and stand in doorways. I think he knows. Back at the house, a deputy came by to serve me the stamped PPOS and do a quick walkthrough of the exterior. He showed me how to angle our porch light to avoid glare on the front camera and laughed once when my neighbor's dog tried to climb into the cruiser. When he left, the house felt bigger than it had in weeks. Not louder. Just bigger. The boys were building a Lego city on the coffee table. My older one had added a police station with a tiny jail cell and a pizza place next door. The little one put a fountain in the middle and told me it was for the calm. He made the fountain blue and then switched to green and said, "No, green is calmer," like he'd been thinking about it for days. The therapist called in the afternoon. She's going to incorporate the letter's idea carefully, and she asked if we could bring something from the house that smells like home for the younger one: pillowcase, sweatshirt, just to have in sessions. It was such a small, human request that it knocked me sideways. I took the pillowcase off the extra pillow on my bed, the one he steals most nights, and realized it somewhere in the process of holding everything together I had stopped washing it because the smell seems to be the only thing that convinces him to stay asleep. At school pickup, the principal waved me into his office and handed me a laminated card with a password on it. If anyone ever calls you saying they're from the school and you don't know the voice, ask for the password, he said. He had a copy, and the secretary had a copy, and the look on his face told me that he had practiced that speech in the mirror. He walked the boys out himself. My older son had asked if we could sign up for the spring soccer rec league and said it fast like he was daring the world to tell him no. I told him yes before he finished the sentence. The little one wanted to stop for gummy worms. We did, and he ate the green ones first. Tonight, the advocate called to coordinate the first step in my ex's plan. Video messages recorded at the center, reviewed by the therapist, no details about where we are or when. My ex didn't get on the call. At the end, the advocate said, she knows the consequence if she deviates even once, and she said it wearing the calm voice people use when the only way forward is to be very, very boring. That's what I want right now. Boring. After dinner, while I was rinsing plates, my phone buzzed with an email from the prosecutor's office. Subpoena will be served tomorrow for preliminary examination next week. Another email pinged right after. The AG had opened a formal complaint file. My lawyer sent a single line after those: breathe. I stood at the sink with my hands under the hot water until they almost hurt because it felt like proof that I was still here, still standing. When I tucked the boys in, the little one didn't ask me to leave the hallway light on. The room was dark and quiet except for the aquarium pump in the corner. I sat on the floor, next to the bed, and listened to him breathe. In the other room, my older one had drawn the fish tank from the visitation center in his notebook and shaded the water in with blue pencil. When he saw me looking, he said, too casually, "It looked better with the lights," and then he put the notebook down and asked if I thought our team would make it to playoffs. I said yes. I didn't mean soccer. He nodded like he understood both meanings. For the first time since this started, that didn't feel like hope running ahead of me. It felt like something that could catch up. Update 7. They served me the subpoena on a Thursday afternoon while I was in the checkout line at Major buying dish soap and gummy vitamins, the clerk scanning so slow you could hear the rubber belt whisper. The deputy had that apologetic half smile people wear when the errand they're on is going to put or not in your day. The preliminary exam was set for Monday at 8:45 a.m. My stomach did the thing again where it thinks it's a fist. The district courtroom felt smaller than the last one, like someone had built it by megaing a bigger room with a bad tape. The fluorescent lights made everything a shade too flat. The same detective had the same folder, thicker now, edges soft from being open and closed. He nodded once in that way that means stay standing. His public defender sat 3 chairs down from him, flipping a legal pad back and forth like maybe the questions would crawl out on their own if he just kept moving paper. I didn't think I'd have to talk. I did. Not long. The prosecutor had me identify the photos I'd taken, the pages with dates in my handwriting, and the printout of the schedule he shouldn't have had. My mouth felt like chalk. I kept my eyes on the corner of the judge's bench where the varnish was bubbled up like a blister. My ex testified. The advocate sat directly behind her, a cup of water in hand she never actually sipped. My ex's voice was steady in that way steady sounds when you practice not shaking in the mirror. She talked about the night with the belt. She talked about the video doorbell clips and about giving the drive to the advocate, and she said out loud that she had been scared and ashamed and very, very wrong. Twice she stopped and pushed her thumbnail into her palm until the white dent stayed when she lifted it. The prosecutor kept it tight. It didn't feel like a story. It felt like laying bricks. The detective went last. He walked the judge through the jail calls they'd already flagged, and then another one from Sunday night routed through a second line that slipped through until the recording system caught up. He said a woman had tried early pickup at the school that morning, said dentist, used my boys' names, got the password wrong by exactly 1 letter, and left when the secretary said she had to wait for me. The office wrote down the make and plate, because they'd practiced, the same way a fire drill makes you feel foolish until the building fills with smoke. The plate traced back to a cousin in Toledo. The detective said her phone had 3 missed calls from the jail that morning, one at 8:02 a.m., one at 8:07 a.m., one at 8:09 a.m. The prosecutor didn't have to lift his voice. He just checked a box on a sheet and the judge wrote without looking up. They developed the disposable camera. Grainy daylight prints, the kind of overexposed color that bleaches the sky to white. A photo of my car at the curb with frost still on the hood. The visitation center sign, cropped too close to be accidental, like someone who didn't understand framing but understood intent. The school marquee with the week's theme spelled out in magnetic letters. None of it illegal by itself. All of it, together, a very loud thing said very quietly. He tried to talk once. Not through his lawyer. He lifted his head and rolled his shoulders like he was about to send a pitch. Your Honor, he said, and the judge didn't look at him. He looked at the public defender and said, control your client, and the bailiff took 1/2 step forward and the space between them closed like a door. That was the only time I let myself think about his hands. When the judge said bound over, it didn't sound dramatic. It sounded like a machine turning in exactly the way it was designed. On the sidewalk after, the detective caught up to me. He told me Lucas County had confirmed the protective order under the other name. He said the Ohio warrant had teeth. He said the prosecutor here was filing an amended information to add attempted child enticement tied to the school incident, contingent on what they pull from the cousin's phone. He kept checking his watch like he was late for something else heavy. Before he stepped away he said, your principal? Tell him he did everything right, and it hit me out of nowhere that there was a version of that morning I don't want to think about. At the therapist's office that afternoon, the boys watched the first video message from their mom. The room smelled like lemon cleaner and the kind of crayons that leave wax under your nails. The therapist had the laptop angled so the boys could see but nothing would save to the machine. My ex had recorded it at the center, plain backdrop, the advocate's hand coming in once to point at where the camera was. My ex didn't say where she was. She didn't ask where we were. She told them she loved them in a way that didn't ask them to do anything with it. She told them she was sorry in a way that didn't move the apology onto their plates. The little one cried the way he does, when he gets overtired, like his body is a hose someone kinked and then release. He asked to watch it again, and we did, and halfway through he put his head on my shoulder and I could feel his jaw working like he was chewing nothing. My older one looked at the ceiling until it was over and then asked if he could draw. He drew a circle and filled it with green and labeled it calm without asking anyone to tell him if he spelled it right. The guardian ad litem came by the next day. She wore shoes with mud on them and apologized once and then didn't again, which made me like her. She sat cross-legged on the rug and let the boys explain the city they've been building on the coffee table. She asked for the tour and took it seriously, nodding when the little one said the fountain was blue at first but green stay. She didn't ask them anything tricky. She watched the way my oldest looked up when there was a car outside and how he relaxed when it kept going. In the kitchen, she ran 2 fingers over the edge of a piece of construction paper taped to the fridge and asked if she could take a photo of it for the file. It was the fish tank from the center, water shaded in and lights sketched carefully, dots for bubbles that never quite lined up. When she left, she said, "I'll have something to the court by Friday," and then she bent down and told the boys she liked the pizza place next to their police station, and the little one corrected her because obviously there was a fountain between them, and she said, "You're right," like the sky had just been given a new name. In between those things, the world kept doing small jobs. The ag emailed my lawyer a notice I didn't understand, and she sent back, "Interim suspension recommended," and that was it. The prosecutor's office put my name on a witness list that made my own house feel a half shade more official. The advocate set 2 more recording slots for my ex, and the therapist blocked off time like she was building a bridge in chunks instead of trying to throw it across the river all at once. The school called me at 10:11 am. On Tuesday, and my heart went sideways because that isn't when they call you unless a head got bumped or there's a new policy on granola bars. It was the secretary with the good penmanship voice. She said, "This is just a courtesy," and then told me the same woman who'd tried the early pickup had called to ask for the password again, said she'd forgotten it on the counter. They'd recorded the number. The principal was already in his office with the SRO listening to the voicemail on loop like it might cough up a new syllable if they wore it down. The SRO filed it. The detective called an hour later and said the cousin had come in with a lawyer and a story about just trying to help. He said he believed about half of it and that half was enough to keep the tempering charge on the rails. "People make choices," he said. He didn't sound angry. He sounded like someone who builds models of accidents to show juries where momentum went. That night at the field behind the middle school, I filled out a registration form while my older one ran Wayne sprints he invented himself, legs too long all of a sudden, elbows out like he was clearing a path with them. The grass still had winter in it. He came back red-faced and hopeful and said, "Do you think coach will remember me?" And I said, "If he doesn't, we'll nake him," and he laughed the first real laugh I've heard in weeks, the kind that shows all his teeth on the right because that canine came in crooked and I keep not getting around to the orthodontist consult. When we got home, there was a plain white postcard in the mailbox with a typed line about a hearing date in Ohio. The stamp was crooked. Everything about it looked temporary. The deputy doing the night drive-by slowed once in front of our place and tapped his horn like he was saying hi to a neighbor. I waved from the porch with a dish towel in my hand because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. Before bed, the little one asked if he could bring the green circle to his next session so the therapist could hang it up for other kids who need it. He said it like anyone could need it, like maybe even grown-ups with titles and keys. I told him yes and meant it all the way down. In the other room, my older one set his cleats in a line with his sneakers and flip-flopped like he was making them introduce themselves. I stood in their doorway for a long time after the aquarium pump kicked on. The house sounded like a house again. Not a command center. Not a watch post. A place with 2 small snores and a hum and a nightlight I forgot to switch off because no one asked me to. The PPO copies are still in a plastic sleeve in the glove box, the card with the password is in my wallet behind my license, and the judge's voice saying no third-party contact runs on a loop in the back of my brain like a metronome you eventually start to count with instead of against. This feels like work. Not the sprint at the beginning where everything burned. The part where you stack the same careful brick over and over, school drop-offs, therapy days, phone calls answered on the first ring, soccer on Tuesdays, spaghetti when I can't think. The detective says we're moving fast and I believe him, but what I can see with my own eyes is that some part of my boys is moving slow in exactly the right direction. Tonight, when I tucked the little one in, he asked me if we could switch his pillowcase tomorrow, because this one smells too green. I said sure. He said, "Blue is okay now." He closed his eyes and kept them closed. I turned the light off and nothing in him jumped.